Our final session before lunch will feature Dexter Filkins, staff writer for The New Yorker, who will discuss the humanitarian challenges around the recent evacuations from Afghanistan with Ali Velshi, host of Velshi on MSNBC and senior business correspondent on NBC.
Always tough to be the one before lunch, but don't worry, we won't make you late. Dexter, good to see you. Thanks again for the introduction. Dexter is someone who I really enjoy talking about things that you sometimes don't get in a policy environment. Dexter is a journalist. And Dexter, yesterday I had a conversation sitting right here with Richard Engel about the day in which, as he describes it, he entered the Republic of Afghanistan and he left, by the end of the day, it was the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. And then this morning I spoke with the foreign minister, the deputy prime minister, about the politics of the negotiations that are going on in this city that you know about and that you've followed for some time between the Taliban and the United States and other parties. But there's an element of this that Qatar has been very involved in, and you have also been very involved in, and that is that when Kabul fell, everybody who needed to be out of Kabul wasn't out of Kabul. And for a lot of people, the main question here is, why did that happen? We knew what the outcome would ultimately be. We didn't expect it would be August 15th. But ultimately, we knew that the Taliban were going to have a very senior role, if not the most major role in Afghanistan, and that certain people, including citizens of other countries, visa holders, needed to get out of Afghanistan because their actual lives were in danger. And on August 15th, that hadn't happened.
You know, we could literally spend the rest of the morning talking about that question alone. I think the short answer, well, let me back up. The evacuation of Kabul began on the day that the Taliban entered Kabul, and which was astonishing. Instead of beginning weeks and weeks before, and I think I don't have a lot of patience for people who say, God, we had no idea what was going to happen, and we did everything we could, and it was going to be chaotic anyway. What happened in Kabul, and I was intimately involved in evacuating Afghans from there, which I hope we can talk about. It is the most incompetent and disgraceful execution of an American policy I've ever seen. I don't know the answer. I suspect that the answer is, why did it happen this way? I suspect it happened this way because at the end of the day, the President of the United States, President Biden, didn't really care enough to push a policy along. And if the best clue to that, the best evidence that that's the case is a diary entry that Richard Holbrooke wrote in 2010. This is in George Packer's book on Richard Holbrooke, where they had a conversation about this very subject, about evacuating Afghans. And Holbrooke, who had been through Vietnam, had been through the Vietnam War as a diplomat and was special envoy to Afghanistan, said, we've got to have a plan to get the Afghans out, or it's gonna be a nightmare. And Biden said, I don't care. It's not our problem. To hell with those people. And Holbrooke was astonished. And I think at the end of the day, that's the answer. And there's a lot of other answers, and there's a lot of other pieces of that. But I think at the end of the day, the President of the United States didn't care enough to put a policy in place that we could all be proud of.
What happened? How did you get yourself into the business of evacuating people from Afghanistan?
I was in Lithuania when this happened. Literally, I was in a hotel room in Vilnius, and when all this started to happen, and I started getting phone calls and emails from Afghans who I had known, interpreters I'd worked with, journalists, government officials, army people, people saying, get me out, help, what can you do? The Taliban are in my city, they're lining people up, they're taking people away, help me. And a lot of them were women, and I don't know, I just dropped everything, and a lot of my colleagues and I who had worked in Afghanistan over the years, we all dropped everything. And so we dropped everything and we started doing like crazy stuff that we had never done before. So for instance, I kind of got together with a group of my colleagues, as like 4 journalists. We had a couple of former State Department officials and DOD officials. We raised $5 million. We ended up chartering several airplanes, and we evacuated, I think, something like 2,000 Afghans from the country.
But last I checked, you weren't an independently wealthy billionaire with jets. Like, how are you even? How does this fall into your area of expertise?
Man, I know nothing. None of us do. But you know, we got it done, and I think what struck me was we just had our last, what I think is the last airplane full of Afghans leave the country just a couple days ago, and that was an ordeal in itself, which I want to talk about. But on that airplane that we got out of the country, there were American citizens, there were green card holders, there were CIA informants, we had Ashraf Ghani's bodyguard, we had General McChrystal's interpreter, we had, in addition to many Afghans who had survived.
So all people who should have been evacuated.
Yes, what are we
by the US
doing?
government.
Why am I doing this? Yeah, exactly. We're just like a bunch of clown journalists trying to get these people out, and we are fighting the United States government at every step of the way. Every step of the way. They made it difficult or impossible. We finally, I think, in this last case, we finally exhausted them. I think they were just so sick of us that they finally said, the only way these people are ever going to go away is if we let this airplane in. They were blocking our flights. They were revoking landing rights that we had. I don't understand what happened. I do not understand.
Was it a policy problem or a bureaucracy problem?
I don't know. The answer you get depended on who you talk to. I will say that the one organization that was really, really helpful was the CIA. Thank you, CIA. Everybody else, when you call them, they're very concerned, they're very nice, they're super polite, and they say, but we've got these procedures and these policies in place, and we're not, and how do we know, and the law, and I would my former colleague George Packer wrote about this, and he compared the American evacuations in Afghanistan to the American evacuations in Vietnam. And the ones in Vietnam were much more orderly, they were organized, they were planned ahead. They started months before Saigon fell. They got many more Vietnamese out. But even then, they didn't get everybody. And my friend George said to me, as we were talking about this the other day, he said the real difference in the end was how many Americans in 1975 were willing to break the rules to get their friends out. And I didn't see a lot of that. We just kept on running up against the rules.
So take us back to how you realize that you got people who need to get out of Afghanistan. I would assume the first instinct is to call some government official and say, you got people who you need to get out of Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And then the response comes back and somebody's not doing anything about it.
Yep.
So what actually happened? How did this all come to be that you would raise money, you would even know where to get a plane from, you would then know how to get a plane into Afghanistan and where to take these people to?
Well,
with what papers?
Oh my God. Fortunately, we had a group of pilots working with us too, so they kind of understood how to do a lot of that stuff that we did not. But there were kind of 2 phases of the evacuation. Both were chaotic, both were insane. The first one was the 2-week period, basically from when the Taliban enter Kabul until the end of August, when the United States basically slams the door down and says it's over, no more. And in that period, it was, and you probably remember seeing this on television, the challenge was getting people into the airport. If you could get into the Kabul airport, which was still controlled by the United States, you could get on an airplane, and the U.S. military planes were sort of taking people to military bases around the world. So to Ramstein in Germany and and to Al Udeid here in Qatar. And that was insane. That was some of the craziest stuff I've ever been through. And so just as a quick example, we assembled, and I'm still in my hotel room in Lithuania. We assembled like a convoy of drivers and cars and 300 Afghans who we knew, or who we knew people who knew, who were really, really vulnerable, who the Taliban were actively hunting. And we tried to get them into the airport. And we got a lot of convoys into the airport, but it was really, really hard. And I'll give you one, I'll give you one example. We had one convoy out in front of the airport for about, 17 hours trying to get in. There's Taliban all over the place. There's gun battles going on. Total chaos. There are Afghans trying to get into the airport. And we had to sit out there in that as we worked the phones and called American government officials, and my colleagues and I can call pretty much anybody in the United States government, and we begged them to open the door. Begged them. And nothing happened, hour after hour after hour. And again, these are Afghans who risked their lives for the United States. And there is nothing, we're just getting nothing from them. And finally, I think at 4 o'clock in the morning, with the assistance of, with a good friend of mine here in the room, Ali Soufan, we managed to get the door open. Literally, a senior American official made a phone call, who made a phone call, and magically the door to the airport popped open, for long enough to get our convoy in. And that was like 10 of us working around the clock for several days and knowing everybody in the United States government for 300 Afghans. That was it. Hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And again, why are we doing this? And why do we have to beg the United States government to open that door? We had to beg them. And if it hadn't been for the fact that we knew all these people in the US government all the way from the White House on down, we never would have gotten that door open. And then what? And I don't understand. And so, I think 4 years from now, I'm gonna be at a cocktail party in Washington, and I'm gonna run into one of those guys, and I'm gonna ask them. I'm gonna back them into the corner, and I'm gonna say, tell me what happened in the White House, because I wanna know. Because I really don't, it's inexplicable to me that the US government could be that negligent and that callous and that incompetent.
Do you buy, I've had this conversation with Richard Engel, do you buy the argument that the US government did not believe this was going to happen this way, or that it was such an outside possibility that they didn't plan for it properly? Because in the end, it happened, and there still wasn't an ability to deal with it.
I don't believe it. I was in Kabul in January, just last January. And, I was there for 2 weeks. And it was completely obvious to me, that the thing probably wasn't going to hold if the U.S. left. It was this very kind of rickety thing, and the moment, U.S. air support and logistical support, if it were to disappear, the thing would fall apart. And there were Taliban occupying neighborhoods in Kabul in January. Did the U.S. government not know that? I mean, I don't buy it. I don't buy it. And I think on the evidence, we know that the White House did know. I mean, they were warned that the Afghan army would probably collapse. I mean, the problem with the Afghan army that was still unsolved when the United States decided to pull out was that we had built ourselves into the Afghan army system. Like, it could not function without the United States. So logistics, supplies, airstrikes.
Let's explore that for a second, because I was speaking to Bob Gates, the former defense secretary, last Wednesday about this, and he felt that even from when he was the defense secretary, they could tell that they were building the wrong kind of army in Afghanistan. That this was not actually what they were going to be able to use to sustain themselves under consistent threat from the Taliban. That when the American army left, the Afghans were going to be not necessarily able to hold it.
You could kind of see, I was there in January. I went up to Mazar-e-Sharif and we met some of the Afghan generals. And like the thing that's heartbreaking to me is that, you know, the Afghan officers I met were brave, they were tough, they were smart, they were committed. But I mean, the way in which this was done, the way in which, I'm not answering your question, but the way in which the withdrawal was done, I think was utterly demoralizing to them. And it wasn't that, I think, as people in the White House have called the Afghans, you know, a bunch of cowards. They just could see the way the wind was blowing. I mean, all their support was going away. But I think, to answer your question, yeah, I mean, the United States made the same mistake in Iraq, which is it basically tried to build an American army in Afghanistan, or an American army in Iraq, and, you know, with lots of like really cool equipment. And, you know, the overwhelming problem with Afghanistan in any realm, whether it's development or the military or whatever, is it's such a poor country. You know, it's poor and it's illiterate, and so you really, really have to start from like way down here, you know. And I think, so like we're gonna have a fleet of Afghan, you know, Air Force jets and helicopters, and it's like, you know, good luck. I mean, you know, because you just don't have the kind of human resources that you need to do that. But you know, they kind of barreled ahead and did it, and so when they pulled the plug on the thing,
given how incensed you are with how the United States government has handled this,
I'm glad that came through.
Yeah, it came through. I want to ask you then about the comments from President Biden about the fact that we couldn't fight for a country whose people didn't want to fight for it themselves. There are some people who've taken issue with that, to say the Afghan leadership did run. There's no question about that. But the Afghan people, it felt like a little bit of victim blaming.
Yes. Yeah, I take issue with that. I mean, I think, you know, it's so easy now in retrospect, or even a year ago when like the end was near, as many of my friends would say, it was always doomed, you know, and we never accomplished anything there. And that's so false, you know. That is such an untrue story. You know, starting with the education of women in that country, which we completely transformed Afghan society, you know. And there were, I mean, many Afghans who were willing and able to fight for that society.
And many who did, and many who died.
And many who did, and many who died, yes. And my God, tens of thousands of Afghans died defending the Afghan state. And I think, look, you can argue about the decision to withdraw from Afghanistan. Should we have left or should we not have left? And that's, you know, reasonable people can disagree on that. But the way in which it was done, I think made this outcome more or less inevitable, which was chaotic and a total collapse. And easy to blame the Afghans. You know, they're a bunch of cowards. No, he's shifting blame from himself.
The process that is continuing underway now, the discussions that are going on between the Taliban and other Afghan interests and the West, they're largely happening here in Qatar. You were also following that very closely. Was it as inevitable to you that was also failing or not going to work, or that the Afghan leadership at the time was not going to be able to be a meaningful part of what happened?
Well, I felt like
you were here. You covered it.
Yeah,
even here.
Yeah. I mean, there are Taliban in this hotel. I think this one, the negotiations took place at the Ritz-Carlton, like down the street. I felt like it was a three-way thing. It was the U.S. government, the Taliban, and the Afghan government. And I felt like that what was happening was the United States and the Taliban, in making a deal, were basically pushing it on the Afghan government. And so, while I don't have a lot of sympathy for Ashraf Ghani today, I actually did then.
Because you didn't think he was really party to this agreement.
They weren't party to it. They were not party to it. And so it was sort of like, Zalmay Khalilzad, the American envoy, and the Taliban, it's like, well, we made a deal. Good luck. You're on your own. And that's kind of what happened. And you could sort of see that. You could see that coming. I mean, it wasn't difficult. I think the other thing that was absolutely evident at the Ritz-Carlton in January was, which we're all seeing now, the Taliban haven't changed that much. They look the same, they act the same, they are the same. They're the same guys, and we are seeing that today. And so they were making these proclamations about, we love women and we want them to be, to be all they can be. But we're seeing.
So they're still making those proclamations, and the world is still struggling with whether or not that's true. And many have said we need to see their actions as opposed to hear their words.
Yes.
The Americans, Tony Blinken has said, until we see something, we're not going to engage. But the truth is, there does need to be engagement, right? There's still people who need to get out of Afghanistan. There are NGOs operating there who have decided not to leave, and in fact, a lot of Afghan infrastructure depends on those NGOs staying. So what does success look like to you in the how do we engage? Do we engage? Do we recognize? Do we legitimize the Taliban government?
That's really hard. Let me give you, to answer the question in a slightly different way, we are definitely engaged. The airplane that I just mentioned that we had 330 Afghans on that we just got out last week, that flew out of the airport in Mazar-e Sharif in the north. And that was quite an ordeal. We had to get landing rights at the American Air Base here, which was really, really difficult. We had to get the airplane. You have to pay some guy like a bag. You give him a bag with $1 million in it and you get an airplane. But we had to get out of the airport in Mazar-e Sharif. And that's like the hardest thing to do because it's controlled by the Taliban. And so at the end of the day, we got the plane out, we took off, but we only did that after the US government engaged the Taliban and, leaned on them pretty hard and said, let this plane go. And we had Afghans on there that didn't have passports. We had Afghans on there who they had tried to kill already, but we got them out.
So that leverage disappears at some point when the Taliban senses that nothing more is going to happen, or they're not going to get the recognition, or that they've got to go to China to get what they need. Right? At some point, the reason the Taliban is cooperating at the moment is because they need money and engagement.
They need money
by the West.
Yeah, a lot of their money is frozen, which the U.S. has, can basically turn off or turn on. But yeah, I don't know what leverage they have now, but they used it, and I think it was useful. It was useful, and the Americans were definitely engaged, and they are definitely talking to the Taliban. And I don't know the exact channels, but it worked.
The discussions with the Taliban began. A lot of Americans weren't paying attention to it. Like it didn't become the issue that it did when the Trump administration started talking to them because all sorts of other things were going on, and it just wasn't front and center. So I think actually in August, when everything happened in Afghanistan, there were a lot of Americans who had no idea how it got to this. What is going on here? How are the Taliban suddenly in charge of Afghanistan? What happened to this government we spent 20 years building and its army? But in fact, the Trump administration had essentially acknowledged last year, this is how it's going to end.
Yeah, that was a Trump deal. So basically, President Biden carried out a deal that was made by President Trump, and you'll hear them say this on television. We had no choice. We were carrying out what President Trump did. Of course, they had a choice. They didn't have to carry out that deal, and they chose to carry out that deal. But it was a Trump deal. It was a Trump deal to get out. And of course, you'll hear this if President Trump runs again for president. He'll say, "I would have done it differently. It never would have happened that way." But this was a Trump deal. The date, the timing, everything.
The things that you're criticizing, though, are not the decision to leave Afghanistan. It's how we left people behind, how we somehow got on the wrong end of the Taliban occupation of Kabul and Afghanistan. That your large point is that all of this is logistics that could have been dealt with before the keys were handed over, or as Richard Engel reports, before we left everything behind.
Yeah, people were talking about this for months. People were talking about this for months. What are we going to do about the Afghans who risked their lives for the United States?
We had it on TV every night. We were literally endlessly talking, including talking to those very people who were stuck in hiding in Afghanistan saying, President Biden, please get us out.
Yeah, and the answer always came back, very earnest people, very well-intentioned people saying, we don't have the right legal procedure in place, or we're waiting on, DOD is waiting on state. It's that kind of stuff, but it doesn't, and like we were hearing that like 2 weeks ago. So, we were trying to get our plane out of Mazar-e-Sharif to Qatar, and a plane ahead of us got out. And like one of the State Department guys said to me, he said, God, these Afghans, they didn't have like passports and their papers were all kind of not really in order. And I thought, like, this is Afghanistan, and like the country is imploding, and like they're, they want this, like, these perfectly kind of stacked, piles of paperwork with everybody's name stamped and everything else, and it's just like, you're not going to get that. And so, yeah, I felt like it was a real disconnect. There was a kind of an expectation in the U.S. government of a really orderly process, and that just wasn't going to happen.
We're not talking about something that's historical fact now. It's still actually happening, right? Yes. We still have a situation in which there are people whom you describe, who the American government should still be getting out of Afghanistan, who aren't fully out. Yep. And then there's this whole nother thing in that there are members of their Afghan citizens who did not work for Americans, who were not interpreters, who were not CIA informants, but are imperiled. Yes. In Afghanistan. That is not something. If this administration couldn't get the folks out who we needed to get out, the second part's not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard country. I mean, I think the population is 38 million people. It's impoverished. If you said tomorrow anybody who wants to go to the United States can like get on a plane tomorrow, like half the country would leave. And so obviously there are limits to what you can do. And I mean, it's heartbreaking because I know lots of really amazing Afghans who sort of like by the letter don't qualify to get out. But again,
most don't qualify to get out.
Right. And I think just so everybody understands, this is what the U.S. government was doing. So as we were struggling to get this last plane out, there was some organizations were getting airplanes out before us, and they weren't going to the United States. They were going to Abu Dhabi, and then they were being sent to places like Kosovo and Albania and Georgia, where these people will be refugees probably for the rest of their lives. They will sit in a camp somewhere, and I don't know if they knew that. I don't know if they all knew what they were getting into when they got on the plane, but that's kind of what we're talking about, But again, a lot of those people are very, very worthy people. And, if it were up to me, I'd let them in. But they don't legally necessarily qualify.
Yeah. So we do have some in the United States.
Yes, we have lots. Yeah,
we have lots. And they are, their life in the United States is going to be about as different as it would have been in Afghanistan. Despite their skill set in Afghanistan, it probably won't translate all that well to America. Language skills are not necessarily there, and they get a little bit of a stipend from the government. But America doesn't tend to like refugees anymore. We used to. We had a statue about it. We used to like refugees. We don't now. We didn't even for the last few years like immigrants, let alone refugees. But the bottom line is we actually can probably make a good life of those who have come. I too would take them. Because refugees from a place like Afghanistan are very happy to be in America and would like to make a future out of it.
Yeah, I think in the case of the Afghans, there's going to have to be legislation to kind of, whether it's an appropriation for money or, but almost all the Afghans now, I think there's like 100,000 of them. They're all on military bases around the United States. So for instance, I worked with an Afghan woman, a journalist. Her first name is Quagga, and I worked with her in January, and I remember I said to her, I was like, Quagga, you might want to thinking about getting out, if it all falls apart. She said, no, don't worry about it. Anyway, she was one of the Afghans that called me in August, and I helped get her out and she is now sitting on she's living in Fort McCoy outside of Madison, Wisconsin, with like 14,000 other Afghans. And they're kind of, the U.S. government I think is getting ready to
Let them out.
send them out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they'll be resettled, so they'll be given to like a resettlement agency, and they'll end up like in an apartment complex in North Dakota.
Wherever, yeah.
yeah.
So there are a number of people who would have liked to have stayed. And even through all the stuff that's happened in Afghanistan in the last 20 years, there are people who went back and people who are think that there's some nation building to be done still. What does that look like to you? I mean, part of the problem is there are logistical problems in Afghanistan right now. People can't get money out of the ATMs. People are selling their household goods to try and make payments. So even if you wanted to stay and make something of it, it's not actually a functioning society at the moment.
No, and I think what we're talking about, by all the projections, are like something like an economic collapse. And so, and I mean, if you know the history at all, this is like verbatim what happened in 1989.
Yep.
And 1989 led to 2001, and I mean, like, really, like, here
Well,
we
a
are.
separate issue that you and I have talked about before. It's now, once again, a failed state. And we actually have a bunch of those in the region, and they're unhealthy. Regardless of whether you think that America has an interest in dealing with it, they are unhealthy. Failed states allow radicalism and extremism to flourish.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I was reading a report by the Sufan Center about the number of terrorists who are inside Afghanistan right now, and the numbers are astounding. Yeah, they're terrifying. And
why not?
Why not?
Yeah.
It's absolutely like an ungoverned space, and that is like really fundamentally the debate when people in the United States say, we don't want to deal with that. I don't want, it's our problem, nation building, and it's like, yeah, but 2001. Yeah. But that whole, what happened in 1989, obviously after the Soviet Union left, Afghanistan imploded, there was a civil war, and the Taliban, out of which, the Taliban arose, and they brought us bin Laden. And it's like all the planets are kind of lining up again in almost exactly the same way. So, maybe we won't get something that terrible, but it's not like you can just walk away from it.
The history of these revolutionary movements, and I'm using the term very loosely, coming into taking power and becoming good governments is poor all around the world, even when you actually believe in that revolution and think it was good. Is there some sense, I was talking to the foreign minister this morning, that they will evolve? Do you see that, having watched the negotiation and having faced, they have to face these conditions that the world's putting on them, that you don't get your money and you don't get your recognition unless you show some form of evolution? What do you think the likelihood of that is?
I don't know. I hope so. I don't know how much influence the international community has. I mean, there are people here I think who better speak to that, but the Taliban is riven within itself. It is not a unified organization. There are many factions, and I mean, if you look back to when they were in power in the 1990s, they became more radical, not less, over time. And so I think it will depend as much on the internal dynamics inside the Taliban as it will on kind of what carrots and sticks, like the West or the international community, can offer them.
What do you want answered? I was into the idea that you were going to show up at this Christmas party in Washington next Christmas, and you're going to find some government official, and you're going to corner them, and you might end up throwing your drink at them at the end. But until then, what do you want to know from them?
I would love to have been in the meeting, in the room, in the Oval Office when they had this discussion, because they had it. There's no way they didn't have it. When somebody said, yes, but Mr. President, we're running out of time here. So I think maybe we need to extend the date, because then if we don't, then there's going to be chaos. And yeah, I just want to hear it. I just want to know. I want to know exactly how that decision was made, because we haven't heard that story.
And why it didn't change when this all went wrong. I mean, it sort of changed a little bit. They put some troops back in to solidify the corridor to get people out of the airport. But that was it.
Just to evacuate people. Yeah.
And even that's not a fait accompli.
You know, I mean, people talk about the stubborn streak that Joe Biden has in him, and that I think we certainly saw that. But I think personally, I don't know this, but I think the White House may have underestimated the scale of the chaos that they ultimately brought. But also, I think they underestimated the degree to which Americans actually care about Afghanistan. And my own sense is that everybody knows what betrayal is, and everybody knows what disgrace is. And I think we saw that on TV. We saw that unfold, and that's gonna hurt him. I think it's gonna hurt. People are gonna remember that.
Dexter, thanks for your time. It's always good to see you, my friend.
Thank you very much.
Dexter Filkins.
Thank you. Thanks.